Jane is the president of the Narrowronna District Family History Group, and she's here to talk to us today about New Zealand family history. And it's interesting, of course, because so many people, part of the colony, you might have English ancestors. Some went to New Zealand, some went to Australia. They often went between Australia and New Zealand. So, it wouldn't be surprising to find that we all had a few New Zealanders in our family tree. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you. As Heather said, yes, lots of our people went backwards and forwards between New Zealand and Australia. And this is a short talk about the things you can do from the comfort of your own home and the things you can find. Now, first of all, births, deaths and marriages is the starting point for any family history research. And the New Zealand birth, deaths and marriages is run by the Department of Internal Affairs. And their births, marriages and deaths are in the same format as Australia's because we're both part of the British Empire at the same time. And that does help with your familiarity with the records that are there. The good thing with the New Zealand records is they're all in the one spot, unlike Australia separated into states. And it rolls over on a daily basis. So if it's the 17th of June here, you can look at the 16th of June 100 years ago for births, which is a bonus. If you're going to order your certificates, order a printout rather than an actual certificate. It's actually got more information on it and it's cheaper. So the BDM'S are $25 New Zealand, which is about, at the moment, $23 something Australian. Takes 8 days to get it emailed to you or snail mail to you, although at the moment they have got a notice on their website saying due to COVID, it takes a little bit longer. They are free to look at, but if you do want an actual certificate, it's $33 New Zealand. Now, the New Zealand certificates are in Maori and in English, and the Maori registers are interspersed in amongst the English registers. They cover different periods because up until 1913, the Maoris didn't need to be registered because they weren't considered, a bit like our Indigenous people, they weren't considered New Zealanders. So from 1913 onwards, you can find them in the birth, deaths and marriages. Some of their events are not registered, but it's, oh, where'd I go? Back. How'd I do that? What did I do? There I am, I'm back there. Some of the fields are slightly different or not available. And the separate registers that were kept weren't enforced. So they weren't like the English settlers. If they hadn't registered by a certain time, same as in Australia, they had to pay a fine for not registering their children. So also in the New Zealand registers, they've got things like World War I and World War II marriages overseas are in the register. From 1915 onwards, it has information about adoption of children. If you're getting in further on, illegitimate, the word illegitimate's been admitted from the registers. So early ones, you'll find there are children listed as illegitimate. And also you get the same as you've got here in Australia where father unknown. Sometimes there is a handwritten note on the side of them saying who they believe the father is, a bit like the parish registers. The New Zealand registers seem to be a bit more interested in crossing T's and dotting I's. The marriage age was raised in 1933 up to 16 years. It was interesting that young girls could get married at the age of 12 and boys at 14, which we find today a bit sort of frightening, but that's how it was. And then they're post 1998, they're putting in censorship details, ethnic details, whether you're an IV donor, and now they're even putting in what your preferred sex is, which is interesting. Now, birth had to be registered within 42 days. If they weren't registered, you got fined. So in the early years, you'll find if people, like in Australia, couldn't get to register the child within that period of time, it's not a case of the child got born somewhere else or whatever. It's just that the parents were trying to avoid the fine. If you're searching for marriages and you can't find it under bride's name, look under the groom's name. That's assuming you know what the groom's name is or the bride's name, but searching under both sometimes gives you a better result. Early church records that were kept and are available when the digitisation process happened, they date from 1840, but they're a bit hit and miss, and they're mainly for the major cities, Wellington, Auckland, etc. Now, there is a disclaimer on the New Zealand Birth, Deaths and Marriages site that says ancestry were not provided by the New Zealand government with the birth, deaths and marriage information. So if you're looking on Ancestry and only looking there, you're missing out on records that are fully searchable for free through the government website. So this is their opening page. It's a good idea to read the homepage, to look at how they did it before you start. As we're used to here in Australia, each of the states have slightly different birth, deaths and marriages online, and New Zealand covering the whole country in one place. You really should read the timeline, which tells you when different areas came into the BDMs, etc. So you keep track of not wasting time by looking for something that's not there yet. So when you go in and you put your search in, up the top here, each of these columns you can click on and search them. So this, when you originally pull this up, it goes in number order, but you can click on name and have it search into just all the women, or just you want all the fathers, and it groups them together. And then you can, order your product online, which is easy to do, and they email it to you or snail mail it. Now, the next thing to go to may seem a bit odd, but in New Zealand, the library system over there is absolutely fabulous for collating a large amount of things into one place. So the Auckland Library is the main library, and it has a huge database of photographs. It's got its local history and suburban history. So even though you might find small family history groups and small historical societies in the different communities, the libraries seem to be the central place to go to. So, and they're things like their Auckland passenger lists are on the Auckland Library. Now, I know you can get passenger lists on various, Ancestry, etc. But I think this is a better way of doing it, because if you know your passengers come into Auckland, they're more, the digitisation that they've done at the Auckland Library is really good quality, and they're much more readable. And they've got a wider variety of data sets there. They've also got specific records for their local cemeteries. The 1881 electoral roll for Auckland's there, and it's complete. Their digitised yearbooks are very interesting, have a lot of information about the communities, the local councils, there's school people in there. As you get into the 1900s, they start to put in, our oldest citizens and our early settlers. The council archives are very interesting because that's where you'll find information where people have been saying we want our road made, or all the things that go into making a community. It's got a link to Papers Past, which is our equivalent of TROVE, and the digital library is just brilliant. There are thousands of photographs there, places, people, really, really good quality research hints included as well. Wellington Library, it also has its own local history database. The heritage postcards section is really interesting if you're looking at buildings. The Evening Post is the Wellington local paper, and that's not on Papers Past. It's only here at the Wellington Library, digitised. Their electoral rolls are there just for that area, and they also link to their Gen Web project, which is a very interesting place to go researching and get lost in. Christchurch for the South Island has a lot of immigration and embarkation rolls. The diaries are extensive. The militia lists are really interesting because there's quite a few Australians in those militia lists. Their cemetery database is for the Christchurch area is very good, because it has things that you don't necessarily find on Find a Grave or Billion Graves, which does have New Zealand graves on there, but it's better to go to the first point of call, you know, Christchurch Cemetery database, rather than going through the other ones. You get more information that way. Dunedin Library down the bottom of the South Island. It's a smaller library. It has got heritage records and its local cemetery records. Not as extensive coverage as the other big cities, but it is a good site if you're looking for a Scotsman or woman who've managed to disappear. A lot of Scots are listed down in the Dunedin area. The National Library for New Zealand and their archives, their search program Archway is reasonably easy to use. Once you've read the how-to before you start, you can get used to it quite quickly. The women's suffrage petition is very interesting, and they're clear digital records to read. Their Defence Force personnel files are there. There's also the National Library has the electoral rolls from 1853 to 1981. You do that via Ancestry, but their naturalisation records, which covers more or less the same period, that's digitised and through Archway. Now, some of the things you can find, this one here, you can adjust your pages, but this is William James Harding, and it came up with 13,000 results, and I thought, my goodness, this man has done an awful lot. No, not really. His 13,000 results is because he was a photographer, and his photographic collection has been digitised and is available through the National Library, including this lovely photograph of him, which I really thought was a very interesting man. So I started tracking him. He's a distant relative. And lo and behold, apart from finding his photograph, I found photographs of other family members that he had taken over the years. And he actually died in New South Wales. So this is his wife, Anne, and I only got one specific result for her, but that's a digitised diary from when she lived in New Zealand, and I was able to download it and read it at my leisure, which was a bonus. So then if you go into the archives with their 4 million plus records, this is an easy website to get around. It's like most archives, it's the government paperwork, the paper trail that everybody gets familiar with. It's got inquests there, but again, it's a good idea to read the how-to before you start, know exactly what records they've got there and what they haven't got, which ones are digitized. If you find something that's not digitized, you can get in touch with their research people, and for a small fee, they will make a copy of it and email it to you, which is handy. So this is Archway again, just to give you an idea of what it looks like. It's a simple search. You just type in your word here or your phrase, and it comes up with all the results, and you work your way through them. So this is what the results look like. It is a little overview, gives you an idea what department has made that particular document. You can look at things, some are online, some aren't. This color coding up here tells you if it's open access. This one here is on restricted access, but you can organize to get copies of it if you're really trying to solve a brick wall or you desperately want it. So there's other libraries and genie groups who've also got New Zealand things. Our own state library of Victoria has many items linked to New Zealand, including the newspapers. The Genealogy Society of New Zealand has got some things online. It's more a case of they would like you to join their group and be able to research deeper into their databases, or you can get in touch with them and give them your research details, and for a fee they'll research it for you. The Narre Family History Group, we've got some excellent books for New Zealand. Our microfiche newsletters and magazines are all there on the days when COVID lets us be open. Casey Cardinia Libraries have got quite a few books for New Zealand, and you can check those out in their catalogue. And of course, TROVE, our great go-to, also has a lot of references to New Zealand. So TROVE, this is a slightly out of date listing of things, but I mean, when I printed this one out, I just typed in the word New Zealand, 8 million results for newspapers and 47,000 were BDMs. So you've got to remember that Australia and New Zealand, people lived on both sides of the ditch. You'll often see that little note at the bottom of a marriage notice says home papers please copy, or New Zealand papers please copy. So if you can't find something in a New Zealand paper, look on Trove, put in the word New Zealand and the name you're looking for, and don't be surprised you could find it there. And their government gazettes, a lot of information in Australia, not just in New Zealand, for those people. A couple of books that I find really helpful. There's one, Tracing Your Family Tree in Australia and New Zealand, and the same for your military ancestors and your Scottish ancestors. But a dictionary of modern Maori is really handy because so many of the documents are in English and Maori. And then, of course, you might have that occasion like I have where I now have Maori ancestors who I'm corresponding with, and of course they keep using Maori words in their emails. So I look them up in the dictionary so I know what they're talking about. Is very handy. So some of the things that I've found over time, this is my lovely William James Harding. This is a little biog on him, telling me when he got married, which was really handy, and who he got married to and where. And that at the time he was a coach builder and he's got 8 children. So it gave me references of places to go and look to confirm this. This is from the New Zealand Dictionary of Biography. And because it's a lot of it is being put in by other people at different times. I still went back and double checked all that information with the English records, and I tracked him to make sure that what was there was actually correct. So Papers Pass, which is their version of TROVE, 1839 to 1948, it's only got 132 newspaper titles, although I think they're starting to add more in at the moment. It's not as easy to navigate as TROVE, but you do get used to it. And the newspapers are done by date, by region, and by title. So when you go into the opening, you find out that they've also got magazines and journals, they've got letters and diaries, and they've got their parliamentary papers. Not as many as we get on TROVE. It's a little disappointing, but you have to think to actually a smaller country, and not as many people wanting to do this sort of research. But their newspapers that are there are clear digital copies, and quite easy to read. When you're searching, you can narrow your searches down to specific dates or a specific region. So if you put in just the word baker, you get far too many results. You have to start filtering it down, know what region you're looking in. So if you go in under regions, you can just tick boxes for the area you want and not worry about the other areas. The newspapers don't seem to have taken up sharing their stories as much as they did in Australia. So lots of what we think of as our family stories that we pick up in TROVE, of all those lovely little bits and pieces that community newspapers put together, in the South Island, you won't find them in the North Island newspapers unless there's somebody who is an important figure in the community. You won't find in a newspaper in Napier a story about Mrs. Smith having her 11th child in Christchurch. It'll only be in a Christchurch paper. So you have to sort of remember that the papers were different to what they were here. And don't get frustrated while you're hunting. Maps are important. At school, we got used to Australia and vaguely know where most of it is because we did it in our geography classes. We didn't do New Zealand very often. So you need to know whether you're looking on the North Island or the South Island, what region you're looking in, the name of your town. And Google Maps, if you do get a specific address out of an electoral roll, Google Maps is great because you can use Street View and zoom in and see if that property looks to be the right age. Is it still the same house that your ancestor was in? And this website here, New Zealand History for Maps of Auckland, is a fabulous site if you're looking in that region. So this is just the regions that New Zealand's divided up into, which is what you need to remember for your newspapers. Down here in the south, Dunedin, this is where a lot of your Scottish ancestors will be. People from Victoria and Tasmania seem to go backwards and forwards to this area, whereas the North Island tends to be more British immigrants, and a lot settled in the Hawke's Bay area here. There are a lot of English settlers, and up to Gisborne. This area seems to be where they've found good farmlands. So then you get down into your districts. So if you're, once again, if you're looking in your newspapers and you want to look, say, at MAORI, all the papers for this area you should search, because a story up here could just as easily be down here in their newspapers, depending on which ones were available to be digitized. And look into Gisborne, because that's their next region. close by, quite often the story would be in the Gisborne paper as well, or that's the only paper that's digitised and available. Education things. The Archives has a very good research guide which gives you what is available and what isn't. And Family Search in their wiki for New Zealand has a very good cross-section of information. Unlike our information here, we tend to take for granted that everybody's got the same things that we've got. Not necessarily so. It depends on the governments and what they kept and what they didn't keep. But you can try Googling a place name with the word school next to it or education, and you'll come up with some good results. Migration. As I said, the South Island is where you go for Tassies and Victorians going backwards and forwards. English, head to the North Island to start with. And many people move backwards and forwards between Australia and New Zealand, so check the Australian shipping records as well as the New Zealand records. My Harding family came from England. Their children are born in New Zealand and they finish up, most of them in Australia and dying in Australia. So they don't necessarily stay put. Military information, there's a lot there. The main British troops from 1840 to 1870, their records are available in the British archives. There's also records available in Auckland archives. A lot of those men actually stayed in New Zealand when their tour of duty finished. 1844 in the North Island, when the Maori uprisings were at their peak, there was over 2,500 men from Australia who went and fought there. A lot of them stayed, but most returned. The pay and muster rolls are at the Public Records Office in London, and they're digitised and easy to get to. And there were many volunteer units, which you can research at the Auckland archives. And in World War I, you've got separate Maori units. So if you're looking for your Maori ancestors who served, they'll be listed under the Maori units. Now also remember, a lot of New Zealanders came across to Australia and enlisted in World War I in Australia, and their records are at the Australian War Memorial. And on our National Archives site, you will find New Zealanders listed in amongst all the Australians, and vice versa. There are a number of Australians who got rejected for whatever reason in Australia, so they hopped on a boat over to New Zealand and enlisted in New Zealand. So you need to look on both sides for them. So this website, New Zealand History, is a really good site for researching your soldiers. Easy to navigate. A lot of information that's been put there by members of the public, and quite a lot of photographs are there as well. This is the Auckland War Memorial Museum. Again, a lot of people have submitted information that's been added in. There's photographs of headstones, there's little biographies. It's quite easy to navigate and got a lot of information, not just on their war service, but you can find out what happened afterwards. And as you can see, you get everything in 2 languages. The Expedition Force paperwork is very, very similar to what you get in Australia, because once again, it's based on the British paperwork. It's a bit hit and miss how good the writing is, but quite a lot of them, for some reason, have been typed, which is very thoughtful, but that's more the people who enlisted in the second half of the war. And you know, you've got all the same familiar questions that we're used to here in the Australian records. Mining is another area to go hunting for missing Australians. A lot of men left our goldfields and went over to New Zealand when they had their gold rush. There's also a lot of other mining that happened in New Zealand, particularly in the South Island, and a lot of men travelled over there to try their luck. And those websites are all got information, has lists of accidents, men who are killed in mining accidents, men who've taken out their license to look for gold or whatever. Those websites are good places to go hunting for them. Family Search, Latter-day Saints, their wills and probate site, data records, absolutely fabulous. Their passenger lists are really good, but they don't have, even though it says 1839 to 1973, they don't have every year. And they've also got submitted family trees. So some of the things you can find, this one is from the Family Search and their probate records. It gives you all the information. So you could, if you wanted to, go to the New Zealand archives and ask for a copy. If the digitized one's not good enough for you, it'll cost you a fee to do it, but it might be worth it if your digital copy's not got clear information on it. But again, it's confirming what an occupation is, where they lived, and where they died. So it's another way of confirming your family information. Google has Wikipedia, which is put in by people, but occasionally you'll find hints there to go and verify another way. Your cemetery photographs, places, maps and names, all those things that we're familiar on this side of the town, you can get, but like most things that's on the internet, take the information as 50% right, 50% wrong, go and find the original documents and verify it before you put it in your family tree. Now, this is one of the History of New Zealand sites on Wikipedia. I found this quite interesting because at least you can read it through and click on the things and find out more information. Write yourself a note of, oh, okay, go to this archive or go here. It's a good way to have an overview of what is happening in New Zealand at different times as to what your ancestors could be doing or why they're there. I found that an interesting read and good background information. This is the value of the digitized photographs that are at Auckland. They are clear. You can download them in various, what do you call it, amount of pixels. And sometimes there's little biogs next to them. This is part of the Harding collection. This is his wife, Anne. And this is one of his daughter's mother-in-laws. But fabulous collection of photographs, and there's thousands and thousands, not just lovely Harding photographs, but other photographers as well. Then there's also fabulous collection of headstones that you can find. They're pretty clear with the photographs taken over there. This one of my Maori ancestors, and it was really good because until I found this one, I didn't know which battalion he was in. So once I had the battalion, then I could go and track down all the rest of the story and background. So it's a short day. If anyone has any questions that I can answer, I'm happy to. But that's it. I could have kept talking, but I'm just going over and over the same. That's another one of my Maori relatives, and it was an interesting chase to find out I actually have Maori relatives, not just English relatives over there. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane, for your informative talk. And we'll see you again in a minute.
Yeah, I'm stopping sharing now. There I am. Okay, I'm back.
Oh, so lots of great resources that they have, isn't it? It's amazing.
It
amount
is.
of resources, yeah.
And it's also the fact that because they're based on the same style as what we've got here, it's not as hard to get your head around how to use it. It's just disappointing that their papers past is not as extensive and as user-friendly as TROVE.
No, but I did find the other day the way to actually download the document. Yeah, so if you read the instructions, obviously, that sometimes helps. Gee, who'd have thought? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah.
It's and the other thing is you need to have an idea of what's happening in New Zealand at the time that you're looking for your people, because it's amazing how much they move around.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I mean, New Zealand's a small place, but you sort of think, oh, they're just going to stay in the South Island or they'll just stay in the North Island, but no, they don't. My family that I've got over there, some of them died in Victoria, some died in New South Wales, some stayed in New Zealand and died there. And then, of course, there's all my Maori relatives who there's still descendants over there today who I'm in touch with now.
Yeah. And so the Auckland Library, the Christchurch Library, I mean, they've obviously got amazing resources as well.
Oh, they're the go-to.
Yeah.
They're the go-to. I think even though there's family history groups and historical societies, I suspect that Auckland was the major driving collecting place for people to deposit things, and people just got into the habit of putting everything there. And also probably because of their policymakers at the time or local government, they just seem to be the collection point for a huge amount of information. And even though it's central Auckland and Auckland district, it also has stuff for the rest of New Zealand. It's a bit sort of like, it's a bit like their National Library in a smaller version, but more geared up to heritage and family history.
Yeah, yeah.
So on that little handout I did, when you go into the Auckland website, you see the list of categories. You just head straight to heritage and you'll be there for the next week.
Right.
It's really, really good. The small, and because it says Auckland City Libraries, and I think there's 3 or 4 under Auckland City Libraries, but everything's centralised for heritage under Auckland City Libraries into the one place.
Right.
So if you were in Auckland and wanted to look at original things, you'd then have to know which of their libraries has got which document. But on their website, it's all in the one place.
Okay.
It's worth a visit.
Oh, my other notes.
You had more questions. Go, yay. Are you researching that over there?
No, I don't have any New Zealand people at all, I don't think. The Maori Uprising, 2,500 Australians.
Men, yes. Men. Volunteers, mainly from Victoria and Tasmania. And I think it was a case of they were looking for work.
Oh, okay.
Quite a few of them took their wives and kids with them.
Oh. I'm off to fight a war with my children.
With my children and my wife in tow. But that was the normal thing, because the Lancers who came out when the British were in control, they brought their wives and kids with them. And a lot of them stayed in New Zealand after, because they had finished their enlistment, like they joined for 7 years or whatever, and they stayed there. And then they decided, oh, New Zealand's not what I need, and they shifted to Australia. So it's a bit of a chase, but those early military people, their records, a lot of them are actually in London's archives, in the Public Records Office in London.
Okay.
because they were under British control. But there's, list after list after list of all the soldiers, and next to them, Victorian, Australian,
Okay.
So that's really worth having a look at. Plus the history of the uprising. There's a lot of information now that's been digitised on the Maori side of it, where you've got the lists of the Maoris who were involved.
Oh, yeah.
Mind you, it's in their Maori names, so it's not necessarily anglicised. My issue with my Maori relatives is half of them have anglicised their names, and half of them, particularly the women, are still going by their Maori names, and I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce them.
Right.
And I assume that the spelling that's on the records is correct. It's probably the same issue that our records have, where an illiterate Irish person gave the details to somebody and they wrote it down that way, that they heard it. I suspect quite a few of the Maori names might be in the same situation. But because I've checked as many places as I can, most of them seem to be written the same way all the time. It might be an A changed to an E, but there's not big differences in the Maori spelling.
Okay.
But thank you, Jane. It was very informative from the point of view of somebody like me who simply hasn't dabbled in New Zealand at all. So
yeah, it's a little daunting when you use things don't look the same as what they look over here, and you think, oh no, how am I going to find this? It's like most things. It's go back and read the instructions at the beginning, or read the frequently asked questions, and you'll find the answer there. But I think it's like most things. If you've got somebody else's information, even if they're family, if you go and double check it, you find those small things that aren't right, and you find the things they've missed because they did it X number of years ago, and more things are now available. So from that point of view, but you will, if your people are in Auckland or in the Auckland area, you will lose hours at the Auckland Library. It's just a fabulous site.
They're all mostly in Christchurch. I've been there too.
Yeah, Christchurch Library website's good. Got lots and lots of links and data there, so worth having a look at. And it's like us; they keep adding things all the time.
Yeah, that's one of the great things, isn't it? Digitising more and more things are being added. It's just an amazing. It's just amazing.
And I mean, I didn't include Ancestry and Find My Past because a lot of the things they've got are only partial things. They're not complete. So Ancestry's got 55 data sets and Find My Past has got 45 data sets, but neither of them have all of something. The only thing is Ancestry has got the electoral rolls, but they haven't got the electoral rolls for the whole of New Zealand. They've only got the electoral rolls for the North Island and Auckland. So if you want the other electoral rolls, you've got to go hunting in other places. Sorry,
go on.
And I don't look at people's family trees on Ancestry or Find My Past unless I'm at the last. I've looked everywhere possible and it pops up and I look at it and say, please tell me you've put in where you found this information. Because if they haven't told me where they found it, I work on the principle it's not right till I can find where they found it and prove it to myself.
It is sort of interesting as a if you're sort of trying to order of the children. I mean, it is sort of good as a bit of a basic first step sometimes, even though it can be a lot of rubbish. And so you can prove it yourself, but it's sort of interesting to know what you should be looking for, I guess, isn't it?
I use people's family trees as my last go-to. Never my first go-to. And the ones that I do find good are the people who are obviously fanatical historians,
Yeah.
or ancestry chasers who actually put in where they found their information. I
Yeah.
love them. It's like an index in a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those people I tend to trust. But and you still find typos. You still find, somebody wrote Herefordshire instead of Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
But they're, if they're quoting their sources, they're more reliable.
Well, thank you, Jane. I know you haven't been well, but thanks for a great presentation again. And it was really interesting. So thank you.
That's all right.